The views expressed and the opinions given by their guests do not necessarily reflect those of the Odyssey Files hosts, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
This is Susan Slaughter from Paranormal Caught on Camera, introducing you to the most epic show ever, the Odyssey Files with David Soyering and Michael O'Neill. You're welcome. Pew, 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 pew.
Oh!
Kim, what are you doing?
Well, I'm telling Mike and Dave, it's time to get on the show.
Oh, well, the Odyssey Files starts now.
Good evening, paranormal community. It is 7 o'clock Central Time. This means you are watching, or maybe later listening, to the Odyssey Files. I'm your host, Michael O'Neill. With me, as always, is my co-host, Mr. David Soyering. Good evening, Dave.
Good evening, Mike. How are you on this beautiful, it is kind of actually nice Monday?
I would not know. I have Mondays off now, and so I pretty much just stayed in the dark in my room and watched The Big Bang Theory and Glee. and
there you go.
And prepared for tonight's show.
Right.
So we got a great one for you. He is been on the show many times. He's a personal friend of ours. And we wanted to bring him back because he has written a brand new book. He is author, paranormal investigator, researcher, who has just kind of released his newest book, The Haunted Ocala National Forest. As he puts it, the world's most boring title. But as Dave pointed out, it's the content that counts.
That's right.
And this is part of his own Haunted America series. And so we welcome back to the show for the entire time, not just the first hour, the entire time, Mr. Christopher Balzano.
Good evening. How are you?
We're good. How about yourself?
Good. So I'm an English teacher. I think you guys know that.
Yeah.
And I just went back to high school, and one of the things that I do is I have I don't have a desk, right? Because I'm trying to lose like 90 pounds. So I figure if a teacher has a desk, they sit at their desk. So I have no desk, so I can run around the room and all that kind of stuff like that. And I have what I did with my desk is I put like 60 different books that are like high interest books. And every day the kids come into the room and they just grab a book, right? And they sit down and they read. And it's interesting because if you say, go get a book, it takes them an hour. If you say, just go pick up a book, they pick it up. So I have all these high interest books on it. And in that pile of books, I have two of my first books, which are the Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle and Dark Woods, right? Which is also about the Bridgewater Triangle. And the kids always pick it up, right? Because they're the most interesting covers: Dark Woods, Cults, Crime, and the Paranormal, The Ghosts of the Bridgewater Triangle. And the first thing I always do is I walk over to them and I go, "Don't read this part; it's boring." And so I flip over to a chapter that I think they'll like, and I hand it to them. So thank you very much for saying even if you have the most exciting titles, it doesn't mean that the content is great. Not that you shouldn't buy those books or read those books, but I have these kids can read the entire Haunted Ocala, from beginning to end, or Haunted Florida love stories. And I like to think that they are at the very least interesting.
Very nice.
So, that's fair.
I'm looking forward to reading it, actually.
I really have to say, though, I love the fact that, one of the first things that you do, and this has nothing to do with the paranormal, this is just you personally, but that you make your kids read. And I think that's great because, it's not just come in, sit down, here's the lesson for today, here's a pop quiz, and then off you go. It's, you need to expand your mind, you need to read. And because I always remember back when Phil Jackson, who was the coach of the Bulls, and then I think he moved over to the Lakers.
A little more triangle references.
Right.
But so he, won all these championships. And one of the things that I had always respected about him is he always made his players read a book.
Yeah.
Every year they had to read a certain.
He's out. We're all out.
Who me? No,
we all just went out. Yeah, you froze. You froze, and all three of our faces just disappeared off my screen. But
that's right. It's all you. So
yeah, and of course there's a famous story about the time he tried to get Dennis Rodman to read, and he threw the book at his head. So
I don't follow that closely, but it's just it's just something that
it's I always like to think of myself, especially now, like you said, I was a paranormal investigator. And a lot of what I do now, because I'm much more a folklorist and I'm a legend tripper, and we can talk about the difference between those things. But it's the story, right? And I always tell my students that there was a time where you loved to read, right? Like you were read to, you picked up the book yourself because you started memorizing the words and you went through it. And there was a time that you wanted to know what those words were, and you maybe you struggled to read, but there was a time when books were a part of your life, right? And it's the same thing for the paranormal. Anyone who's into the paranormal, there was a time when you had awe of the paranormal, right? You had awe of ghosts. You enjoyed a ghost story. And then depending on your level of commitment to what you do and what you're doing, all of a sudden it became so much about evidence, and it became about trying to find that needle in the haystack EVP, that you lost the fact that you just spent 4 hours in a haunted location. Like that should make your hair stand up, right? Like you should have awe, you should be interested. Or it's like, well, that can't be proven, so that's not real. That's not part of the paranormal because I can't hold it, I can't touch it. And in the same way, like that those kids with those books, like what I try to do is I try to bring back that joy of the paranormal. You will never find a picture of me in a black shirt. I know I'm wearing a black shirt right now, but in a black shirt looking all angry at the
folded arm,
right?
In a cemetery. Yeah, you gotta be in a cemetery or out in front of a haunted prison or something. Yeah.
Now, I never go out there with like an empty mind or not taking what I do seriously, but it's story, right? Like we should have awe, we should have narrative, we should have, because no one I know in the world is like, there was an EMF spike and like everyone goes, ah, it might be interesting, it might be compelling, it might be self-gratifying for you, but the paranormal needs to be part story. It needs to be a large part story, depending on how you handle it. And so that's what I'm trying to do with my books that I'm writing now. And of course, with legend tripping, and even the show Tripping on Legends, I try to bring that aspect of the paranormal back to the forefront.
So here's my question to you then. And the only reason that I'm asking this is because we have the full 2 hours. And so I don't feel rushed to get right into your book. Because
most people don't feel rushed to get into my books, as my book sales will tell you.
But this is important though. So one of the things that I always say when people ask me how did I get into the paranormal, I didn't have that childhood experience. It was a curiosity, and that was because in high school, especially, the only books that I would read voluntarily, that weren't like coursed, were like haunted story books. Yeah. Loved them to death. Could not get enough of them. And then obviously later in life when Ghost Hunters came out and, that fascination came back. And then Dave and Steve and whatnot took me out on my first event and I became an investigator. And the rest is history. And here we are. So, I mean, when you introduce your students to your books, or maybe there's a couple other books in there that also deal with the paranormal, I don't want to necessarily say, is it your intention, but does it ever occur to you in like the back of your mind that maybe you're setting out some of your students on a path to become future investigators?
I hope that I am actually. I'm doing a ton with the books out and with just how active I've been. I'm doing a lot of events this fall, right? Between September, October, November. And I wanted to start this charity. And I just haven't been able to this summer. I wasn't able to start a charity, bringing paranormal books and paranormal material into the teenage sections of libraries, because there is nothing more high interest to these guys other than maybe sex and drugs. And I could write that book too, but than the paranormal. Like they're fascinated by it. You'll see them walk by other things to go to a ghost book. And I think that providing that type of material, I used to do out of Ghost Village, Jeff and I used to do Ghost Village for kids for a little bit. And it was partly getting adults to like, how can I communicate the paranormal to children that might be experiencing something or something like that. But then the other part of it was actually creating curriculum and lesson plans that use ghost stories and haunted legends and things like that to get all those Common Core and state standards in there. And that goal is to like get them to read, get them to be excited, get them to be interested, get them to be storytellers. But in the back of my mind, because they always ask, they want a field trip to go out to the Ocala National Forest and see some of the stuff that I write about in my books. I know that I'm at least building, I'm keeping that interest strong. Now, I don't know if some of them will go up to be paranormal investigators. So here's a funny story. My show is called Tripping on Legends. And the reason why I call it Tripping on Legends is that, you know, one of the problems in the paranormal is that we deal with a topic that is considered fringe, right? And so to justify what we do, people often embrace pseudoscience because it makes it solid, makes it reasonable. That's part of the reason why investigators think they need to be so serious, right? Is that you're dealing with a topic that's crazy, so you have to be serious because you want to present it so that people will understand you or they'll feel you. If you take a step back from that, right? And if you actually just kind of embrace that it is an insane thing, then you can get a lot of things across to people. You can make it fun. You can make it interesting. They'll be totally engaged in what you're doing, right? And my students, I'm hoping, will be the people that go out there and say, you know, I'm going to bring that sense of awe to things. I'm going to, you know, so I put all that stuff out there. But I make mistakes, and it's okay that I make mistakes. That's where the tripping part comes on, right? It's obviously a play on the word legend tripping, right? But part of it is that I'm constantly making mistakes. So I go out and I'm following up a legend, and then I find out 2 months later, 2 years later, that I got the whole thing completely wrong. I've had students who have now become investigators who go on my legend trips and prove me wrong. And then they come back to me and they say, right, so there's this really great haunting in Sarasota, Florida, involving the Amish, right? And it's a total Romeo and Juliet type of situation where he was Amish, she was not. They were meeting at this bridge. And there was a mix-up. He went to the bridge and he found her clothes there bloodied because she had accidentally fallen into the lake, into the creek. And it was in the mouth of an alligator, right? It's Florida, so it's got to be an alligator, right? And so he completely freaks out. He commits suicide by jumping off the bridge. She comes back. She finds his body in the water. She climbs up to the bridge, and she commits suicide. And now forever, he's on the north side of Sarasota, of this creek, the Amish side. She's on the English side of the bridge. And they hold each other, they hold their hands out to each other, but they can never meet because spirits can't cross water. And so for eternity, these two ghosts appear at the bridge, never to be together again. And I went out and I legend tripped that. We brought all these different things. We even brought ripped clothes that we threw. We didn't, try to get alligators. And the whole time we were at the wrong bridge. And it was one of my students, right, who actually said, hey, listen, I think you guys have the wrong bridge. And he showed me another bridge. So, yes, I am brainwashing and training the next generation of legend seekers.
Okay, so I have another question about that, about the story itself.
Because, the Sarasota one?
Yes. Well, yeah, the one that you were just talking about. And that is because you said spirits aren't allowed to cross water. Mm-hmm. I was always under the assumption that water was a natural conduit for energy and spirit energy. So why would they not be able to cross that then?
Well, okay, so the easy answer to that is neither of them are right. We have no idea how water affects spirits, right? Like we're taking a scientific premise and we're saying that we can apply that to something that's not scientific. So people who are engaged in paranormal investigation and they use a lot of equipment, they're just dealing with folklore, right? We don't know. And I can always sum this up with I was talking to someone. I was on their radio show, but he's also a good friend of mine. And I had the author Clarissa Vasquez was also on the show with me. If you guys know her, if not, you should get her on the show. She's amazing and has a new book out too. And we were having a discussion about the paranormal, and she was talking about how cold spots, right? Like, so a ghost can make cold spots. Right. And then she was talking about how a ghost can make hot spots. And I'm like, well, how does the ghost know which is which? And this host, who's also a scientist, like he's a Harvard-trained scientist, he starts going on with, exothermic reactions and endothermic reactions and and I'm like, well, how do they know whether it's going to be endo or exo? And what did he fall back on? If they're angry, it's this. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. So you just took all this science and then you dealt with folklore to tell me whether or not it was going to be cold or hot. And I think a lot of the paranormal's like that. And so we get these ideas, and they could be from different cultures or anything like that, that water is a good conduit for spirits and they can travel through it. And, is there running water around? And then you have this other deep folklore, especially here in the South where I am now, that water can't cross over, or the spirits can't cross over water. I don't think they're necessarily in conflict with each other, but they're reflective of two different brands of folklore. And keep in mind, just because they're near running water doesn't mean they cross it. I guess you could also say, if you really wanted to, that's what the person who's skeptical about this whole thing would say.
Right.
Well, I would think a person who's skeptical about this whole thing would say, that's complete poppycock. Show me like the documentation that these deaths even occurred.
Well, right. I meant more skeptical in terms of like that folklore is part of the paranormal more than a skeptic of the paranormal completely. Yeah. But it's, and here's the thing, like, when you're dealing in folklore, if you take something like that legend, in Sarasota, people have experiences there. Like, it's undoubted that people have experiences there.
Oh, yeah.
It's maybe potentially part of the story that there are these alligators there. And so to keep little kids away, they say, don't go there. There are ghosts, thinking that it will freak them out, and they won't go near this creek, and therefore they won't be eaten by an alligator. And everyone we talked to in the area, now that was both people, but then also the Amish. Some of the Amish people were able to talk to me too. They knew nothing about the legend, but they knew about the giant alligator that was living in that area, right? So you have those two things. You can't deny that people have experiences. It's the stories that we make up about them that people can argue over. So I always say, you can say that a ghost is real or a ghost is not real. That's a matter of belief. But a ghost story is always true because people tell it. And so many of these haunted legends that we have, because there's a backstory, it clicks. But that's that's people trying to work through something that is crazy, right? Like, there shouldn't be ghosts. The average person who experiences ghosts is not looking for ghosts. They're not expecting ghosts. It's not part of their frame of reference. But you fall back on Romeo and Juliet when you see something weird in that creek area, and now all of a sudden you have this story of two star-crossed lovers dying in an alligator. And so I think a lot of the stories that we make up about the paranormal are normal people or average people trying to work it out in their head that they just had something crazy happen to them. And they're less insane if they can say, oh yeah, but it makes sense because this happened there. There was a suicide there, or, well, 5 people died on that location, or, they found a cemetery there once, so it has to be, someone's upset the burial ground. And it makes sense. Therefore, the crazy stuff they just experienced also makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that. Or, I could see that if that story is actual factual, that the two lovers were dancing around on the water, having a great time until somebody started saying that they can't cross water and that they're stuck on either side. And, that goes into a whole nother school of thought where if you tell that story long enough and enough people tell that story long enough, you're potentially creating that story.
Right.
Right. And it actually will materialize. So now what you have is you have these two lovers who were doing just fine. And now they're completely separated because of us people.
Yeah, no,
creating this barrier for them.
Mind blown. So, so I'm not an investigator, right? Like, so unless it's a rare case, and it's usually someone that I know, I don't go into people's houses. I don't go into, and as a general rule, I also don't go into like famous locations, like haunted hotels, restaurants, things like that. I stay away from them because usually they're pretty well known, right? And so in the places I'm talking about, there's generally small town places where the neighborhood or the community says that this is happening. And the community spreads that story. And so in my world, I deal with the idea of thought forms and tulpas all the time, right? Like, can the community collectively believe in something so much that they create it? Right. You took it to a whole nother level, saying that they were happy in the afterlife together, and we all destroyed it by saying that they couldn't cross water. You made us the bad guys of this story, which I think is totally interesting. But yeah, I mean, thought forms, tulpas, like, are we bringing things in? And of course, if you believe that ghosts are real and we're paying attention to that bridge, that means that another ghost, if they can, will go to that bridge because someone's paying attention over there. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm over here and no one ever comes to see my ghost. But, okay, I'll go and pretend to be an Amish person. Like, I've read Amish Paradise. That's my jive. I got that. I can do that. That's my vibe.
Nobody reads Amish Paradise, at least, at least unless you're talking. If you're talking about the Weird Al version.
Oh, is there another version to talk about? Come on,
I don't think so. But you don't read it; you listen to it and greatly enjoy it.
Well, I'm such a Weird Al fan that I sit down with volumes of his lyrics and enjoy them with a brandy and a pipe. So,
as you should, and he would be so proud of you.
He would be.
So, I mean, I guess because this has a lot to do with your legends and everything, and I remember, and I'm still waiting on an answer for this, which I have never gotten, is I remember an episode of The Dead Files where one of the things that was going on was there was a spirit who was really, this is obviously according to Amy Allen, who was pissed off because investigators that had come into this location had drawn him back, had pulled him back into this location and then left him there because they didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Yeah.
So with Dave's theory of, basically us believing in something and changing what is going on in the afterlife, do you think that is more widespread than we think? I mean, do you, not so much that we create, these legends and these topaz, but that these spirits exist, they're doing their thing, but because a story comes out or a story gets changed, we then change their situation,
their narrative,
against their will. Do you think that happened? This is probably a new concept, so maybe you haven't been able to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it could happen, but I think that there are even communities that firmly believe this, right? You have a belief, and you have people, and they maybe go out and do it, right? They legend trip it by going out and trying to experience it, by going, to the cemetery and knocking on the mausoleum 3 times the way you're supposed to in the legend, right? The question is, do they do it enough to trap something, right? Like, I can see getting the attention and maybe giving you a little juice that way, but do they have enough to actually trap something there? Which is different than, and I haven't seen the episode you're talking about, going to a house. Was it at a house?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah. As opposed to living in a house where you're in constant contact with them, and then you actively do something that you don't know, regardless of how good the investigators may be, you don't know what you're playing with, and therefore you do something weird and you trap it, right? And then you pull it on. I think that's maybe different than town legends or ghostly legends that are in some place which are not frequently visited upon and maybe doesn't have that. Is the potential there? I think it's a very interesting theory. I think that we definitely, in the investigative world, can trap something that could either, in an intelligent kind of haunting, potentially move on, and our engagement in it keeps it here somehow. But I'm not sure that necessarily happens with ghostly legends. I think those are separate enough for who we are and not in our constant view that we might be able to change the narrative of what is going on or what we say about it. But I don't think that we actually can trap the spirit there. But it's a very intriguing idea.
Yeah, go Dave.
Go Dave.
I'm done for the night. I'm just going to sit back and relax and just rest on my laurels.
Yeah. Dave is the guy who actually gave me my nickname that I had for years because he's the first one to call me the Puckwudgie guy. So we were at a convention. Oddly enough, we were at a convention in St. Pete. It was the infamous Ghost Hunters St. Pete. It only happened that one time, and it was the first and only time my good friend Robert here left Key West, and I just done Dave's show, and I was, we had talked Puckwudgies for 2 hours or whatever it was, and I walk into this convention center, and I'm trying to find my friend because he wants me to hang out in his booth. And Dave from like across the convention center just yells, "Puckwudgie guy!" And so that's kind of how I got my nickname. So that's I owe him that at least. So, although not many people call me it anymore. So, but still, it was Dave originally.
There you go.
So, your newest book, Haunted Ocala National Forest. Now, I see that you have shared something that I haven't brought in yet. Now, you're gonna have to tell me when you want that.
I just thought like if we hit any of these things and people want a visual aid, it's just a presentation. But if we talk about especially, I know we're going to talk about Gerard Schaefer. We can pull up some of the Lady Lake stuff that's in that presentation. But sometimes people like to see the Stakini and the Coyote Woman if we talk about those.
Well, because that was your that's like your subtitle, isn't it? And Dave was talking about that right as we were coming on the air.
For what?
For his new book, The Haunted Ocala Forest and the Legend of the Coyote Woman.
Yeah. Yep. I did pull that up.
I think the Coyote Woman is a really popular story. Like I can always catch people with that story because it touches upon so much of so many different aspects, like the human aspect of it, and then of course the cryptid aspect of it. Kind of draws people in because it is such a crazy, insane story.
Well, for Minnesota, we've never heard of it.
So here's a question for you before we dig too deep into: is there something weird going on in Ocala?
Yeah. Yes. 100%.
Okay, because I was going to say years ago, wasn't
100%.
Ocala like where, like the frickin' snipers were on I-75 shooting drivers just randomly?
That was Washington D.C.
I thought that happened in Florida on I-75.
Well, it's a good guess because
when you hear weird death, serial killer, famous crime, you just naturally tend to assume it's in Florida.
Yeah,
right.
My favorite episode or my favorite moment in Criminal Minds is when JJ says, "We've got to get going. We've got a case," and they say, "Well, how bad is it?" And she goes, "It's in Florida," and they all go, Yeah, no, like I think it's important to if you're going to start talking about the Ocala, it's important to identify what exactly this is. There are places in the world, and we can talk about different theories as to why that is. There are places in the world where the energy is higher, right? Where what you can feel, the natural elements out of there are not the same where they are anywhere else in the world, except for these locations. Paranormal people, we like to talk about things like vortexes, things like portals, very much like the Bridgewater Triangle and Freetown within the Bridgewater Triangle. The Ocala has something going on there. And it's really difficult to say it, but I'll say it, something rotten going on, something that feels folklorically, I like to say, feels like it's cursed, right? There is something evil in the woods, but that extends to kind of other aspects of things. So I'll give you the one of the first things I talk about in the book, because people need to know about it, is this thing called the shift. In the Ocala, and when I talk about the Ocala, I don't just talk about the 600 square feet or square miles of the actual forest, but also the towns that surround it that I say are in the shadow of the Ocala, because they're just as impacted. Things shift. So cemeteries are a great example. Cemeteries will be in one location, like these cemeteries in the woods that were once like, the town was settled by these people that created a cemetery. It's right there on Tuesday, and on Thursday it's not. People riding, because there's a lot of four-wheeling or mudding, as we say down here in Florida, through that area. People on paths their whole lives, not sure if the path is going to be there on any given day they go out. Hunters who go out there, who mark areas where they've seen certain things, or where they've set up hunting stands, will go there and it won't be there, and then 2 days later it will be there. One of the most interesting cases, which is not in the book because it's the central point of the book I'm working on right now. We went there, and it was part of the entire story. It was this swamp witch story, which actually we found out ended up being a lynching and not a witch trial where they hung a woman, but rather a lynching of these two men in the swamp area. When we went there, we followed all of these crazy signs, right? These things that drew us there, these non-scientific things that drew us to this one location, and hanging from the tree, we found a noose. The next week, even though we gave a map to another writer, Mark Muncy, who you should also have on the show, he went to the exact location. The noose wasn't there. I've been to that location 3 times. 2 times the noose has been there. 1 time it hasn't. You say something like that to the people of the Ocala, and they go, yeah,
like it's just commonplace.
It's just commonplace.
Not a big deal. Yeah.
That's why they just live with it. One of the towns that I focus on is called Astor. They have Astor time, what they call Astor time. If you live in Florida, they have salt time. I'm on salt time. I'm on island time. Astor time is just, it may be there, it may not be there, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, who cares? Like, we might not get there anyway. The road might not be there. They have time slips in all these areas in the Ocala. They have these time slips, these large, hours of missing time that they can't find. In the Ocala, which has been the site of chemical testing, of Air Force bomb testing, bomb runs, there are all of these bunkers all over the place, which people are not really quite sure what they're there for. They've just been there for so long. Geocachers mark these bunkers off. You can go there one day, it's there, and the next day it's not. And a lot of these things that appear and disappear have paranormal things attached to them. And so you have to wonder whether, the Ocala is a constantly shifting portal to another Ocala somewhere, or whether it just radiates this kind of, if you think of like the show Fringe, if you've ever watched that, pulsates between another dimension, and sometimes you're looking at one of the dimensions, and sometimes you're looking at the other part of the dimension. And so people disappear there all the time. When you start to look into, and it became so massive I couldn't include it in the book and still have it be a ghost book, the number of missing person cases that involve the Ocala. Either the person is found in the Ocala, even though they were 100 miles away when they were abducted, or they disappear near or in the Ocala. It's just staggering. And you have story after story after story of people who say they'll be looking out on their driveway, and they'll see someone starting to walk up their driveway. They'll look away and the person's gone. And they're like, was that a ghost, or was that someone who was walking from one dimension to another dimension and slipped? And that shift is something very real and very alive in the forest.
Well, that just piqued my interest. I mean, that sounds like an incredible place to go spend some time.
I always say it's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
It is like there are, you have Alexander Springs, you have all of these other natural springs, you have beautiful woods, you've got campgrounds, you're not too far from the ocean on either side where you are.
Right.
And you're drawn in because of this beauty and the nature that's there, and yet then you're also, there's kind of this like, you want it, but you don't want it. That seduction and then repulsion that kind of plays on you. If the Ocala were a horoscope, a sign, it would be a Gemini 100%. Those two different sides of it. And the other interesting thing that I found, and I'm finding this more and more, is that people don't know where they are in the Ocala. They maybe can say they're on the left side of the Ocala or the right side of the Ocala. And people who are left Ocala people don't even acknowledge that there's a right side of the Ocala. They think they think their forest, the forest ends at Marion County, right? For example. And then the people on the right side don't acknowledge that there's anything on the left side, right? And you say to someone, well, where did this happen? And they can't identify where it was. Like, unless there was something, very specific, or it's a location that's specific, or they can say, I was at the Astor Town Hall. You ask them once they get into the woods, where were you? And they're like, I don't know. I don't know where I was. So there's this weird meshing. It just kind of becomes one thing, which is once again uncharacteristic of other places that are like that.
I wonder if it'd be not easy, but easier to document stuff like that with just using today's electronics, like your cell phone, right? I mean, I don't have an Apple, I've got Samsung, but I've heard, that, with the new Apples, what they've got this incredible LiDAR system built into it. They've got this incredible GPS mapping. Mm-hmm. So I just wonder, how many occurrences are there of people who are hiking in the Ocala and then all of a sudden, like you said, have no idea where the hell they are, and 4 hours later they end up and they're just like, okay, somehow we made it back to the car. I wonder if they actually gridded their path, what would that look like, right? I mean, would it just be, hey, I got turned around in the woods and it's a common explanation? Or where did I go for 2 hours? Because I'm not even on the damn map.
That's an amazing thing, and you can do that, and you can put a lot of effort into that. But that doesn't mean on Thursday that grid's going to be the same thing.
Right.
And that's what the hunters especially experience, because they are out mapping those locations. Right. You know what I'm saying? Right. But then there's also, you got to keep in mind, when you were just saying turned around, we're talking about, unlike other parts of Florida, a lot of the towns in the Ocala are generational, right? So people have lived there for 3 or 4 generations going back. Oh, they're not, and those woods are a common everyday thing.
Yeah.
Right. That's like saying hey, can you go down to the corner store for me? And you get lost on the way to the corner store. They know those woods on a Monday like the back of their hand. It just doesn't, they just can't guarantee that on a Tuesday it's going to be the same location, which is insane and frustrating, but also gives you an entire backdrop of what this place is like. And then when you go there, it's just eerie. And it's not just eerie because it's small town and because it's woods. I'm used to woods. I lived in New Hampshire. I spent time in Freetown, which is, one of the spookiest places in the world. The Ocala just has something off about it, and you just feel it in the woods. You
is
feel
it that pit of the stomach type of thing? When you're out there, is it that just that gnawing pit in your stomach type of waiting for some shit to happen?
And sometimes it's almost like, it's like a for no reason a heightened adrenaline rush, and you become ultra aware of what's going on, right? And it's not magic, it's not bibbidi bobbidi boo. You're just there, and it feels like something's going to happen. It's like when you wake up in the middle of the night, nothing necessarily has woken you up, but all of a sudden you hear every creak, you hear every thing that's going on. You hear the wind outside. You're walking to the bathroom. If you have to walk down a hall, you can feel every creak. You feel the coldness of which steps are hot and which steps are cold. It's like that all the time when you're in the woods there. And so, it's like a fight or flight risk thing going on with you. You're just kind of uber aware and waiting for something to happen. But then there's also this whole weird impact on waves. So the first time that I knew I was in the Ocala, and I wouldn't even say that I knew I was in the Ocala at that time. I didn't know what it was. We kept trying to take pictures. We were going to a library. We kept trying to take pictures, and everything turned out dark. And it was a bright and sunny day. we were talking to each other no further than like 3 feet away from each other, 2-3 feet away, and it was echoing. Right? Like sound waves and light waves, something messed up was going on. And we were like, this is like being in a tunnel somehow, almost like it's cut off from everything else. And it's not mountains, right? It's Florida, right. So there are no mountains.
Right.
What's causing this echo? It doesn't make any sense. And that's the backdrop for the creepiness. And so within there, people make up stories about what's going on. You know, I call it Ocala syndrome. They are so used to it that they just associate these things. And when people tell me the stories, the first chapter of my book is a great example of it. It was written with intent. It's not like any first chapter of a ghost book you've ever read, probably. This girl is telling me this story, and she's like, I think she was 22 at the time. She's telling me about experiences when she was like 19 or 20. And it's all this absolutely crazy stuff. Witches walking down the path and like a ball of light and a floating head of a baby. And as she's telling me all this stuff, it's not whether it's true or not true. It's that she was living in this almost glass bubble, right? Like a shaker thing. And it all made sense to her, and it all was all connected. So when you get stories from people in the Ocala, they have these absolutely outrageous things that happen, and they just naturally assume it's because of the forest. And these things that are absolutely outrageous, and maybe we wouldn't connect them if we saw them, they see a narrative line in it because the forest is out to get them. Or they spend too much time in the woods, or whatever is in the woods is constantly checking in on them. And sometimes it's a random fire in the driveway, and other times it's the bouncing head of a teenager.
I have so much that I've kind of built up to say that I don't even know where to start.
You have to tell me to shut up then if I'm in the middle of something. You have a question.
Well, so the first thing that came to mind was that the people of the Ocala area seem to take after the Twix commercial, where it's left Twix or right Twix.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
That, you know, and if you go to the other side, then you're a traitor.
Yeah.
As you were describing what was going on with these shifts, the first thing that came to my mind, obviously, like you, was seems to be a dimensional shift.
Yeah.
You know, where some dimension that path isn't there. But, you know, so the question then becomes, what is causing it? What caused that area to become so destabilized that it's shifting different dimensions? And so I have 2 questions about that. One, do you think that you or anybody else that maybe you have talked to or know has come from a different dimension, that they have gone in to the Ocala forest to hunt or to just take a hike, and when they walked out, they were in the same dimension that they were in when they left? It seems to be, you know, it hasn't changed to the point where they would really notice anything, but maybe they're in some place different than when they started.
Right.
And the second thing is do you think that maybe one of the causes of this is maybe that grove of trees, which you said 600 square miles?
Yeah.
Maybe it's, people are going to consider I'm crazy for saying this. Maybe it's alive or evolving to the point of it's creating its own energy force. That
is a living, breathing thing. I think not last year, but 2 years ago, I still get, even though I haven't been in Massachusetts in almost 15 years, and those Bridgewater Triangle books are 15 years old now, you know, and they still call me for interviews. And I'm like, I'm tired of talking like the same old thing about the Bridgewater Triangle. You know, like people, I'm like, I'm not even there. Like, you know, but I can tell you the context of things and stuff like that. And I started looking at the people who look into the Bridgewater Triangle. And I started looking into things such as, you were talking about ghost hunters earlier. TAPS is just outside the Bridgewater Triangle. Mm-hmm. The Warrens are just outside the Bridgewater Triangle. Jeff Belanger is just outside the Bridgewater Triangle and grew up just outside. So in addition to all these crazy stories, we have probably you have enough people within 20 miles, 30 miles of the Bridgewater Triangle that are the foremost authorities on aspects of the paranormal. Is that a coincidence, right?
Right.
And then I started thinking about the people like me who follow this. All of the people who are like the first kind of steps into the Bridgewater Triangle. We're all divorced. We're all crazy. We all have this incredible bad luck, right? For 15 years, no one's been able to make, other than a resident, make a documentary about the Bridgewater Triangle or even a highly successful episode. I get approached all the time by people wanting to produce things on their show about the Bridgewater Triangle and things like this. It never falls through. It always falls apart. It doesn't want to be seen. And so I started thinking about, isn't that then a survival instinct?
Mhm.
You don't have a survival instinct unless you're alive, unless it's a being, unless it's a thing. And so I really started to see the Freetown State Forest, especially within the Bridgewater Triangle, as a living, breathing thing. Hungry, bringing people into it, going through cycles the way people go through life cycles, all this kind of stuff. The more that I started to look at the Ocala, I saw the same exact thing. I don't think we can say where it started. I think it's impossible. And I think we're obsessed with the question of the why. Why is it like this? Why is it doing it? And I think that question is unanswerable. We won't know why unless some kind of revelation comes to us. But as to the question of whether it's a living, breathing thing and whether it has needs, whether it has sexual desires and hunger, and whether it sometimes laughs and whether it oftentimes gets angry, I think 100%. And I think the people who live in that area would probably agree with that statement.
Is it just me, or does it seem like when you find some really off the wall weird shit like this, there's like some government facilities nearby, right? Because as I'm looking at this Ocala, I'm looking at the map as you're talking and stuff like that, and you got like the Lake George bombing range, and then just kind of northwest of that, there's another bombing range.
Yeah, I mean,
over here, there's another. The Navy has a bombing range, and then there's Pine Castle Impact Range. You just got to wonder if this.
Let's not forget
if this is alive.
Yeah.
And they're bombing it. Is that somehow creating this further?
Yeah.
Feeding it. Yeah. Is it
feeding
right?
it 100? Yeah. I think so. You also forgot about the chemical weapon testing, as well as the Israeli fighter jet bombing bombing allowances that are allowed there too. And the people, once again, the people in the town surrounding, I don't know if it happens as much now as it used to, but I know that it would just be like, shake up, it's bombing day, like it was like, imagine that, like imagine being in America and having something like that happen and you just go, meh, there you go. I think all of those kinds of things are types of fuel and types of food, and only add to it. And that is and it's the variety of crazy things that happen there, and those kinds of things that are drawn to it that make it breathe, make it run.
So, I want to know about the Coyote Woman. So,
all right. And this is a really good example of a story that was given to me that made no sense, right? and it was mysterious, and it was like, the more I dug into it, the more that I saw that, like, this is really happening. Like, if you ask this guy, it 100% is true. True, it's 100% the experience is real. So the story is that years ago, decades ago, there was this town of Rosewood, Florida, in Lake County. Maybe it was in Lake County, maybe it was someplace else, but around Lake County, around Alexander Springs. This kid heard the story from his grandfather, who heard it from his grandfather, kind of thing. So you have to imagine, we're talking like, 40-year difference from the time. As they would walk down this road, they would go down this path on the way to Alexander Springs, and they found this, and there was a cemetery, and the grandfather would tell the story. So they were living in there, and there was this absolutely beautiful woman, and she fell in love with a man. And her parents absolutely 100% did not agree to this coupling whatsoever. It wasn't so much the fact that she was 14 and he was 19. It was the fact that she was white and he was black. And so the family 100% said, this is not going to happen. The dad was completely enraged by it. He's like, no way this is going to. And so they would have to sneak out. And so they would sneak out of their houses at night and they would meet at this cemetery and they would, I'm sure, have long conversations about art and literature and do nothing that they shouldn't be doing. But they were still sneaking out to meet at this cemetery. So the father finds out and he's 100% dead set. He's going to send her away. But the mom loves her so much that she's like, I can't live without her. Like, she's my daughter. She's my pride and joy. She convinces the father to at least let her stay in the house. The father's walking in town and he sees the guy. He sees this woman who he knows probably has deflowered his daughter. And there's no way anyone's going to do that. And especially not a black person, right? So he confronts him right there in the street and he starts to beat him down. Well, as he's beating him down, no one in the town, white or black, came to help. The white people kind of formed a circle around him. They started chanting. They started cheering him on to this. And he's beating this guy essentially to death and finally drags him off into the woods. And the man is never seen again. Some people say he moved out of the state completely. Other people say he was actually killed and then buried in a shallow grave. So the woman, the girl is walking in town and she hears that something has happened and she goes to the location and she sees like the blood and she's asking people like, well, what happened? What happened? And they're kind of like, now the laughter part is over. They're just kind of like really, like anxious and not looking at her. And so finally someone tells her, what has happened. And she's furious and she goes home and she goes into her father's bedroom and she takes out his revolver and she sits there on the bed and waits for him. So the dad comes home, she stands up, she says the name of the man she loves, and she shoots him 3 times. And her father drops dead. And in that moment, she has a realization. She realizes what she's done. And so she's like walking around the house. She knows that she's going to be arrested for this. She knows bad things are going to happen. She knows her mom's going to be home anytime. And her mom's going to see what she's done. And how's her mom going to react? And so she does the only logical thing she can do. She runs to the cemetery that she used to meet her boyfriend at. And she's standing there and she's just crying. And as she starts to cry, these coyotes start to circle the cemetery. And they're circling the cemetery. And the pack is getting larger and larger. And she's crying harder and harder. And they're howling louder and louder. And she's crying harder until finally you can't tell the difference. It's this one sound. It's this coyote howl with this woman's weep and scream underneath it. And the two things are mixed. And she lies down on one of the graves, puts the gun to her head, and kills herself. Only she doesn't really die. Almost instantly, her body starts to transform, and she becomes part wolf, part woman. And she runs off. She jumps over the fence of the cemetery. She gets into the middle of the pack, and they all run off together. And if you go into that area of the forest, you're going to hear those screams. You're going to hear that crying and that howling underneath a coyote's howl. And there's going to be, you're going to, and she still is there to this day, haunting the woods. And if you are a man who has done something wrong to a woman, or if you're a man who has done something wrong to a minority, she's going to find you and she's going to kill you. So her ghost is still out there acting like an avenging angel upon this. And this kid and his friends, they would spend time in that cemetery. And that was kind of a legend trip they used to do, is they would go to the cemetery. They would lie down on these graves that are in the cemetery. They would close their eyes and they would start to hear the coyote woman screaming from all around them. And then they would freak themselves out and go home. And it was one of those things where if you ask him, he says, if you just went into the cemetery, you were in that area, you would never hear it. But if you lie down on those graves, just like she did that day, you would start to hear the coyote woman coming for you. And this was a legend that was passed down from the grandfather to the father to this kid. This guy's probably going to tell his kids when it comes around. And when you look closer at the legend, it makes absolutely no sense. First of all, there is no Rosewood, Florida. There's no town named Rosewood in that area. There's a town named Rosewood, all the way, on the coast. I found there are apartment buildings called Rosewood. There are communities called Rosewood, but there's never been a town of Rosewood before. It's in Paisley, Florida, for those in the audience who want to go try to find the Coyote Woman. And maybe at one time was Shockley, Florida, because these towns around the Ocala, they change their names often. And so when you're doing research, you're like following something, and you're like, wait a minute, what town is it? Wait, that town's over here now. Like what? Because the names change because it has to do with founders and things like that. Not only that, there weren't coyotes in Florida until the 1970s. So if this man's grandfather's grandfather told him the story, there would be no coyote. There wouldn't have been coyotes in that area. Now, the area of Rosewood, Florida, which is on the coast, is the site of the worst racial massacre in Florida history, which was the Rosewood Massacre. They made a movie about it a few years ago, which was essentially if To Kill a Mockingbird became violent. So they went in looking for a man who was said to have assaulted, a black man who was said to have assaulted a woman. They dragged him out. They put him on trial. They put him in the jail. People wanted to hang him. And they took that opportunity to go back into the town of Rosewood, which was an African-American community, and take another person who had like a warrant outstanding. And the people fought back, and there was a huge shootout, and up to 100 people died in the massacre. The exact number is not known. That's nowhere near this, but that name of Rosewood might have gone and traveled all the way over into the middle of the Ocala because of the racial aspect of the story. So it's crazy because you have all these elements that are telling you that this story is not real, and yet we have these people who have had these experiences, that they've had these, they've gone into that cemetery and they've had weird things happen to them, and you can't tell them that didn't happen.
I really have to say, though, that it wasn't until they put themselves in that like psychological position of laying down in the graves that they could hear anything. So, I mean, to me, always trying to be, logical or whatever, would say that, that was pareidolia, that was their just taking the wind or whatever and creating this in their own minds. So,
I've talked to experts, and they'll tell you that if you take the sound of a coyote and you mix it with a woman in deep sorrow and kind of wallowing and screaming and crying, you're going to get the Florida jaguar. Like, that's what that sounds like, right? And that's probably what people are experiencing, is not coyotes, but probably jaguars. And yet it only happens when they lie down, right? Or people have said that they've seen her walking through the woods, all of which can be 100% in their mind, getting hyped up, making something out of nothing, paranoia, suggestion, but you can't tell them that because for them it's real and it's solid. And so you just have to say, this is their experience.
And big cats those big cats are pretty rare and pretty reclusive.
Yeah,
so if it is a panther, the chance of it running around, they're black panthers. If the chance of them running around,
I said jaguar. Florida panther is what I meant.
Yeah, they're Florida panthers. Yeah, they're black panthers.
Yeah.
The chance of them running around a cemetery where there's human beings there, I would say is slim to none.
Well, I want you to keep in mind though,
they could be in the woods around there, but
it's not anywhere near anything. Like when we went out there, the person said, I will drive you there on the road. You guys are living in Minnesota, right? It was a road in name only. Like I have no idea. If you were to ask me right now, let's go see the Coyote Woman, even if I had the GPS, I would have no idea. And I wouldn't be able to get you out there unless maybe we were on ATVs. And this dude's going like 50 miles an hour through the woods because he's so experienced. Going full, like missing trees. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's not. Yeah. So, I mean, it might be. It is not. It's not like it's in a populated area.
Gotcha.
And you find that a lot. And we found it. The cemetery. It's Shockley Cemetery, right? Which is why I think they used to run the town, or they used to run a township called Shockley. And so these are their cemeteries. These are their graves. It's pretty much like the forest has overtaken most of it. It's funny because there's a fence around it now to protect the graves. Ocala doesn't care about that. It just has smashed trees all around and broken the fence. So it wants those graves. It's interesting how it almost has a personality, like you were saying. It's like, oh, a fence. That's adorable.
Stupid children. Yeah.
Yes. Whatever. Yo, yeah, metal. I got that.
Yeah, actually in a couple of pictures that are there, you can actually see the fence. Because I noticed that when I first looked, like the fence is destroyed. Like something heavy fell on it and took down a big section of it.
So imagine me, big old fat guy, I wanted to get into the middle of it. And I'm like, oh my word, I'll just climb on the tree and crawl across the cemetery and make it to the middle. And it was quite an adventure.
Cool. Yeah, we've got a cemetery here called Vicksburg Cemetery. That's kind of the same thing as this. It's not quite as in the middle of nowhere, but it's a small cemetery that was a small town. It was a railroad town, and the town actually they actually moved it because it was supposed to be a hub, and it wasn't. And the train station stopped like 10 miles up the road, and so they actually picked the town up literally and moved the town 10 miles to where the train station was going to be. But they left a cemetery. So I've been there a couple times. Phenomenal cemetery, very active, has its own stories and legends, flowers bleeding on the first full moon of springtime.
All right, this is the part where you email me that information so I can research that.
Sure.
Because that fits in with a cemetery book that I'm working on right now. So
sure. Yeah, I'll send it to you.
It's interesting, though, because in Florida, and I'm used to, like, the library I used to go into in Massachusetts, like my town library, was like 250 years old, right? Like, I'm used to this age and this. And Florida is old. We don't think of it as old. We think of it as new because we think of the coast and we think of the hotels and we think of beaches. But so much of Florida is abandoned. When I think of Central Florida, I don't think of Orlando, right? And Tampa, right, which is like this. I mean, the Ocala is right above that going this way.
Right.
I think of it like this. I think of it up and down, and I think of it vertically. Because once you get off the coast, you find time and time again these towns that have, and the trains are a really good way to track this kind of stuff. The train comes through, the train has a stop, the train decides to stop somewhere else, the town goes under, right? Or they start to harvest for turpentine, like the trees for turpentine. The turpentine trees run out. They just leave the buildings and go someplace else.
Yep, start over.
Frosts kill the crop, and they just go down further to the south, and that town becomes abandoned. So you have ghost town after ghost town after ghost town in this horizontal part of Central Florida. And it adds for like some good stories because people have tried to explain what really happened there. Like, why are these things going on? Why was this town abandoned? And in the even in the light of very logical, like, well, half the town went off to fight in World War II and either died or realized, hey, Florida sucks, and never came back. That's why the town went under, and yet it's like, no, it's not because of that. It's because of a witch's curse, or it's because what happened to the Timucua, the Native American tribe that was there. Well, it wasn't. It wasn't that we wiped them out, right? And it wasn't that they were, the things were warring, because that's, that doesn't make. It does make sense, but it's not sexy. Instead, they were all wiped out by this pink fog that killed half of them, and the other half were killed in great battle of power between these two. Like, we make up these kinds of stories to understand it. It's kind of like if you were to just watch Unsolved Mysteries and go like, all right, what kind of crap can we make up about what happened there? Like, what weird story can we have? And when the supernatural is allowed to get involved, you can go absolutely through the roof and fall back on all kinds of archetypes and all kinds of cliches and all kinds of well-known stories, and it makes sense for people.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like the people of Florida read too many Stephen King books.
You're assuming people in Florida can read. Oh, no, just kidding.
My bad.
Good thing we're way across the United States there.
I'm
way on the north.
I'm not, and I'm trying to sell a book about Florida to Floridians. And I don't want to offend Connor or Pamela, who are in the chat, who are both amazing people that are living in Florida. No, I I think like New England people, right? Like New England people we're messed up because of Stephen King and Edgar Allan Poe, and we're messed up because of Lovecraft, right? Like, and these stories and Hawthorne. Who is that? Who is what you turn to? And so what happens is in Florida, generationally or even now, you have like Gothic Victorian stories that come down from the South. And then you have dudes from Minnesota who have been here now for 2 generations that bring their Minnesota legends down. And it's like you have, all this like this mixture of things that become a little bit of creep from here, a little bit of creep from here. And that's what helps to build the story and make it almost uniquely Florida. And I hate to say this because it sounds like a compliment, but it's almost like Florida is like the next generation of melting pot.
I hope not.
Did I just say something nice about Florida? I think I kind of did. So can you edit that out in the no? All right. What are you going to do?
So do you think that there will ever be a time, whether it's you or somebody that you know, just kind of going back to the whole living forest thing, where you might put together a series of experiments to see how the forest reacts to certain stimulus?
Absolutely not, because I'm a folklorist, and that sounds wicked scientific to me.
I don't know. I think it'd be more.
It does. It sounds interesting, but it's
the forest will eat you, and then just disappear, and then experiments over.
At the very least, you get a lot of ticks.
And
I have an irrational fear of ticks, so it's hard doing research in there.
Rattlesnakes.
I know a lot of investigators that have gone up there and they've done experiments and they've tried things. They've investigated, and it's very interesting to me how the investigators that I know, who I highly respect, who go there. Don't worry, I'm not going to also say you should have them on your show. They falter when it comes to a certain point as they're running the experiment, and they just say, I think it was a spirit animal, and I'm like. Okay, like that doesn't sound very scientific at all. And these are people who live and breathe by their equipment, and they eventually get to a point where they fall back on the folklore too. And it just becomes one of those things where it's like, because that's what the forest wanted. So I'm not really interested in that experiment, but if you want me to go into that cemetery and lie down on that grave and call to the coyote woman, I would be 100% up for that.
You got to find it first.
Oh, I know where the cemetery is. If it's there on that day, then I'll be able to go back. That kind of experimentation, that's interesting to talk about. But I really don't do that kind of stuff anymore.
As I say, I think there's a phone number on the fence. You could just give them a call and be like, "Hey, is the cemetery there today?
Is the cemetery there?" Say, "Hey, just looking to come out, kind of like to see if
Yeah, I'd like to come back and visit it. I've been out there a few times. Can you just double check and make sure before I road trip all the way out there?"
That's so Florida ride show attraction sounding to actually call and see whether it's open today or whether they're doing it today.
Is it available to be seen today?
And you know what? When we made that trip, we hit like 4 different stories that are in that area. And then spent some time at the Alexander Springs. Like the Ocala is a beautiful place, and there's a lot of interesting things going on. So feel free, even if you call and the cemetery's disappeared that day, there's other things that you can enjoy there.
So one last question, because I do actually want to get to your book.
Are we talking about the book? This is all in the book.
Well, that's true. But like the whole like serial killer cults and stuff part of it. Does it when these paths, when the cemeteries, when these towns or whatever disappear, or they're just not there that day, do they appear someplace else, or are they always in the same place? It's just whether they're there that day or not.
It's more of they're not there that day. So I'm not sure if you guys are probably about my age, although you seem like you're a little younger than I am. How old are you guys?
Believe me, Dave's way older than you are.
I'm pretty sure I got you beat. I'm 56.
Oh yeah, you're wicked old. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm only 47. But there was, I don't know if you guys were fans of the Twilight Zone from the 80s, which is
To a
probably
degree.
I actually like the Twilight Zone from the 80s better than I like the Twilight Zone, but that's just between you and me. Like, I don't want to get that fight going with people. There's an episode where these two people, and I think one's, Arkin's son, Alan Arkin's son, they get messed up in time, and they end up being in a minute of time that hasn't been built yet. And so they are, or is not being used, and they explain time as a series of carts, and you go from one carriage to the next carriage to the next carriage, and there's people constantly building that minute of the world. But they only build what people are going to experience. And if you go into an alleyway where in that minute no one's going to walk down that alleyway, they just don't do it for time's sake. Right. And you end up being in this like white, kind of like the Matrix white room. And I think that a lot of this shifting is like that. I don't think it goes to another natural place. I don't think that there's like necessarily another Ocala where things are going on and people swap and they live in the more is in like it goes to some void temporarily only to come back.
So, okay. So then obviously it's getting, let's just use a cemetery. Let's say it's a cemetery. So the cemetery's here, right? Mm-hmm. It gets picked up on Tuesday, taken to the void. So are they just bringing like what it has to be replaced by something? It can't just be like the dirt. I mean, because that would be cool as hell now. So like if it actually
and that you could experiment with, right? Like that you could.
That would be cool as hell. But I'm assuming that it's just going to be the same kind of woods and small pine trees and shrubbery and whatnot. That's all in the surrounding area. It's just the cemetery is going to be gone, but there's going to be something else in its place. And then when it comes back, the cemetery will be back.
Right.
And then whatever that shrubbery and whatever small trees and wild grasses, that'll be gone.
So the best answer I can give to that would be that noose, right?
Yeah.
So when we went there, you could see the noose hanging, and it's more of like pressed up against a tree itself. And it's so part of the environment that it's almost grown into the wood, right? Like it's very weathered looking. It's pressed up against it. Almost seems like it's inside of it. Like the tree has grown up around the noose. Right. As a matter of fact, when we first saw it, we thought we had just gone to the suicide tree on the other coast, and they had this like lightning rod, like this lightning rope that went through. So if lightning hit it, it wouldn't hit the tree, it would hit this metal thing and would travel down. And we thought that's what this was. We thought, it was because it looks like steel. It doesn't look like rope. When the other person went there, the tree was there, but that mark in the woods was not there. Almost as if it was just as if like it had never existed. So
or the tree was being protective. Because if the tree and the rope have some sort of symbiotic relationship, then it's possible that tree would have the ability to make that rope not be there if it didn't want it to be there for a particular individual.
Yeah, and I 100% believe because of the circumstances leading up to us finding the rope, we were meant to find that rope on the day we found it, and I was meant to not see that rope and then see that rope again so that I would understand the shift that it existed. Right. The physics of it are totally beyond me because I don't have an answer for that. It can only be what's inside my head for that. And so, I do think now, if I can kind of, go off of that, I know that the other writer, him and I take a very different approach to the paranormal and to the ghost stories that we tell. That area in particular, we have dramatically different stories about what is going on in that location. We often joke with each other that, whether who's right about what's going on there and things like that, which I love because it's like that. They're stories, dude. There is no right or wrong.
Right.
I think it was very specifically, almost like a wink and a nod that like, hey, you're on the right track. And he might not be. And that's no attack on him. It's more of like, you're looking into this, keep looking into this, keep digging. He really doesn't need to see this because he doesn't know what's going on here.
Right. Or and maybe he's being steered a different direction to go discover something else. And maybe his eyes just aren't open to see it because he's frustrated because he can't follow in your footsteps and see what you're seeing.
So, he has now taken some of his Florida research and he's starting to connect it to all this stuff that's in the Appalachians, right? And so he's making this other entirely different connection. And it's like amazing. Like he's doing some really good work with that. And it's like, yeah, maybe that was his path. And my path is for the last 3 years to be obsessed with this one little area of Sumter County where this swamp witch is. And to keep rolling that around in my head and trying to find some kind of answer to it.
Right.
Okay.
His seems easier because he can sell books on that, and I'm still trying to figure out what's going on with this little place.
Well, I have the answer that I think we have all been thinking about, but don't have the courage to say, and I'm going to say it. What is happening here is aliens are photoshopping our planet.
Yeah, makes sense to me. I'll buy it. Should I spike up my hair up and say it's definitely aliens? Should I mess up my hair like the guy on TV?
Yeah,
it's definitely aliens.
It's definitely aliens.
Definitely aliens.
Definitely aliens. I don't say it's aliens.
You got to have one of
Definitely
those
aliens.
cool, great big necklaces, though. Like with the gigantic.
Yeah. I keep that
Egyptian-
under wraps.
Yeah,
so.
I'm going to say you got to have that 25-pound necklace.
That's very personal, Dave.
It is.
That's a personal symbol.
So, I get it. Yeah.
I don't disagree with you on that.
Well, you should. It's a terrible theory.
And well, it's not, because there are tons of UFO sightings in the Ocala and things like that. And so what you have to do, and there's cryptid sightings that, once again, I mentioned the book for context, things like the skunk ape, potential Pukwudgie sightings, but there, once again, it's not Pukwudgie Ocala National Forest, it's Haunted National Forest. So I couldn't focus too much on those things. And when you're dealing with all this stuff, you can get totally lost. This book took me longer to write than any other book that I've ever written. And part of it was because of those questions that you're asking and going around and around and around in my head and not being able to answer them because there is no answer to them. And then you add all these crimes and you add in the cult activity, you add in the rainbow people. And it's like, dude, it's too much. I just want to sit in bed and eat fudge. And I don't want to have to deal with any of this anymore. And then, there's that voice in your ear saying, put the fudge down. There's something going on here you need to talk about.
It's interesting because that was me this afternoon. It was more
fudge.
It was more Hershey's chocolate, but it was chocolate.
That's funny.
But great segue, because you just mentioned, like the crimes and the cults and stuff like that.
The rainbow people. I don't know. I have no idea what the hell that is. That caught my ear.
Now we're gonna start with the rainbow people.
Okay.
That's
something totally new to me. So
wait, totally new to you now, this moment?
Yeah.
I was told you guys did a whole bunch of research going into this interview, and you guys never discovered the rainbow people?
It was based off of what you had done. You said you did research on, which did not include the rainbow people.
I was going to say the email I got from Mike did not have the words "the rainbow people" in it.
I only told you a certain amount so I could still seem wicked smart in the interview.
There you go.
Like if you guys are able to pull things out, like you pulled out the date, the phone number on the Shockley Cemetery, I at least have to have some kind of ace in my hold.
Right,
like
absolutely. Our guests are always smarter than us. We're just here for good looks. That's all we're doing.
And you look damn good.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
We are the eye candy. Our guests are the brains.
Right.
There you go. Sometimes I wish I was eye candy, but all right, let's talk about these damn rainbow people.
Yeah, rainbow people.
Rainbow people. So it's important to so I've already had some stuff. I have the book out and I've done some interviews, and I've gotten some pushback from the rainbow people in that the reference to them as a cult, right? Like they do not consider themselves a cult. So it's a national group. There's no necessary tight affiliation. There's no leadership to it. It started in the 1970s, kind of influenced by Woodstock, where there would be these times. If you think modern times, although they're still going on, think what do you call that thing when they go out in the desert? Burning Man. So think Burning Man, but in the woods, right?
Okay. Yep.
And so all across America, And the first one was in Colorado. People meet in the woods for a week of music and peace and unity and praying and kind of and then they leave, right? And they go and live their lives. And the other, the other 50 weeks out of the year, they are dying to get back there into the woods and be with the rainbow people. And so at its best, it's a time when it's an area where people come together to just be with nature and convene with nature and kind of do all of this praying and singing and connecting with people and sharing of what they have. There's no money there. And so it's like, I'll give you this cup if you give me that stick, like, that kind of thing going on. And at its best, it's an amazing group of people having an amazing time and sharing and being what is the best of us. But in the Ocala, that's not the only thing that's going on, right? So whenever you have something like that, and you have the influence of drugs, you have the influence of the taking out of boundaries, you're going to have people that take advantage of that. And as I was looking more at some of the crimes having to do with the Ocala, I started to see all of the different things that I saw when I was working on Dark Woods, and I was working with an occult authority. And he was telling me little things to look for in the woods, and he was telling me patterns to watch and things like that. And I started seeing these things coming up time and time again in the rainbow people and in other things having to do with the Ocala. So amongst these groups of people who are only really supposed to be there for a week, 2 weeks out of the year, because it's Florida, some of them don't leave. And if you ask people in the towns, I always use this as an example. They say when you go into like a Walgreens, in a place like DeLand, Florida, you open up the cap of the deodorant to make sure it hasn't been used, because the rainbow people go into the town and they they go into the store, they go in and they brush their teeth and they put the proof on, they put it back out, or they wander onto people's land and then they disappear back into the woods. And so there's a mystique about the rainbow people that there is that these things that disappear, like that shift I was talking about, are just rainbow people who know the woods really well, and they come out this end and they go in this end, but they come out in this end because they know the woods so well, and they're wanderers and wandering spirits. So you have this kind of like cult aspect in terms of that there are these people who are living in the woods who have a common belief system, and some of them might be sketchy. But then, and this is where it gets darker, then there are people who practice all forms of witchcraft, the entire spectrum, and they find that when they go to the Ocala, things get amped up. Their spells, their intentions get amped up. The bad things that they try to cast, they get amped up. And it is my belief, based on all that stuff, and based on what other people have told me, that there are practitioners who have worked their way into and influenced some of the rainbow people. Then there are organized criminal cults who are running drugs, they're running people through Florida, especially because keep in mind, Florida is really skinny. It goes the West Coast to East Coast. Best way to get from West Coast to East Coast is to go straight through the Ocala, because you ain't going down I-4 because you're going to kill yourself going down that road, right? And so they are bringing things in from either the West Coast, the Gulf of Mexico, and they bring that up to Daytona, and then from Daytona to the rest of the United States. Mm-hmm. But it's not just a criminal organization, because there's a higher intent to it. And so they have, once again, infiltrated the rainbow people and become part of that. They're not rainbow. Rainbow people are not evil. The elements have kind of slipped into them. And so you have a lot of teens, you have a lot of early 20-year-olds primed for human trafficking. They go out into the woods to do drugs, listen to music, and live life for a week, and then they're never seen again. And that kind of thing happens in the Ocala all the time. And I believe, based on signs that I've seen, that there is, in addition to that, both a mystic, paranormal cult aspect to it, but then an organized cult. You hate to use terms like Illuminati and things like that, but seeing the signs and seeing the activities, it's a criminal enterprise, which I feel has that a higher, I'm going to say satanic, but not satanic the way you might be thinking, aspect to it, in terms of, I think it's run very much like the satanic cults in Massachusetts and other places.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So then when you came across the rainbow people, you also came across, and this is what kind of surprised me, is and maybe I shouldn't even say surprised, because it is Florida, but like there's a multitude of serial killers that are associated with the forest.
Yeah. Some of the most famous cases that you can heard of. Like, if I were to ask you right now you guys can't do it because you cheat, because you did your research ahead of time. But if I were to ask you just like, what are some famous murder cases, or you'd say Son of Sam, and you'd maybe say Night Stalker, Gacy, you'd say Bundy for sure, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe you'd say, if you are a real big true crime fan, you're gonna say Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, right? Like, those are, once again, like these. If okay, how about female? Do you know any female serial killer? Yeah, well, Arlie Murnos, like that. And these things all happen didn't happen in the Ocala, not all of them, but they've touched the Ocala somehow. So both Bundy and Otis Toole, they spent their jail time. They were, their death sentences were in the Ocala. Probably the most prolific serial killer in Florida history, who was friends with all these people we're talking about, is a guy by the name of Gerard Schaefer. He's committed crimes in the Ocala. Murnos, who people might know from the movie Monster, if you don't know by her name, like, if you track all of her crimes, and if you say that the Ocala and the shadow of the Ocala extends to Daytona, which I believe it does, especially given this cult activity that I'm talking about, that's where her hunting ground was. She killed people on the right side of the Ocala and the left side of the Ocala. She specifically dumped one body in the town of Ocala. So once again, she's connected. So you find all these different examples, in addition to the multitude of like weird crimes and disappearances and murders and bodies that are dumped there, these serial killer cases that I can't think of another town or city in the United States that has had so many, or area of the United States that has had so many of these people pass through it or be associated with it. That's not like New York. Like, you could say like, oh, Son of Sam was in New York and someone else that was a serial killer went to New York. Like, but actually like living, breathing, did things in that area. It can't compete to the Ocala. Like, it's touched so many of these famous killers.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about, this is the one that obviously we've all heard of Ted Bundy. Although I didn't particularly know how bad he was until, like, how intense his reign of terror was, until I, started doing research for the show. But this Otis Toole, I wrote down, he's only been convicted of 6 murders, but going through like his life, because Dave and I did a month where we did a whole bunch of serial killers, and one of the things that always stood out to us was how messed up their childhood was. Mm-hmm. Whether that was a parent's fault or not, or whether they're just a strange kid. But I mean, going over this Otis Toole,
if your audience has no reference for what his mindset is, he is the inspiration for the Otis character in the Devil's Rejects, right? Like the Rob Zombie movies.
Yes.
Like the guy with the long gray blonde hair, gray hair.
The one who carves off people's faces and then wears them as masks. Yeah.
He was the inspiration. Otis Toole was the inspiration for that guy. So if we can get a frame of reference, just how messed up this dude is.
Yeah. That's messed up. Yeah.
And this is what I wrote down. Convicted of the 6 murders. Father, alcoholic, which left, when he was a kid. Mother, abusive. Grandmother, a satanic person who got him into like the satanic worshiping and stuff like that. His other relatives, like aunt, uncles, had sex with him So obviously into incest and whatnot. I was like, are you sure this didn't take place in Alabama?
Yeah,
It seems like it would take place there.
It's funny because if we want to talk about after Tool, which almost mirrors exactly the childhood of Rod Ferrell, who once again bounced between two different locations, a lot of alcohol abuse. He admits, and his mom admits that he was sexually molested by grandparents who used him in satanic rituals. These people never had a chance. Like, you can't condone anything that they did and excuse anything they did, but you're like, wow, man, you are messed up. And the crazy thing is, so what he's most famous for, I don't know if you'd say most famous for it, because a lot of people don't know this, is that he's the person who killed Adam Walsh. So he's most likely the person who killed Adam Walsh. And so there are a lot of people that were at that Stark prison who didn't like him, who were in Stark prison because his murder sparked, America's Most Wanted and put a lot of criminals behind bars, right? So he kills Adam Walsh, and he begins to send once the father becomes, whose name is escaping me, Robert Walsh?
John Walsh.
John Walsh, thank you.
Yep.
Once he becomes famous and he starts America's Most Wanted, Otis sees an opportunity to make some money. And so he begins to blackmail him to say, I will tell you where your son's body is. I'll tell you where the head is. The head is in a different location. I want this amount of money, that amount of money. And he's sending these letters to him, essentially looking, saying that I will give you the kind of piece you're looking for a certain amount of money. And the body parts are in different places. And that is messed up. But then you take it one step further. He was illiterate. The dude who was writing those letters was Gerard Schaefer, right? So Gerard Schaefer, who is totally sadistic, is sitting down there going like, I'll write these letters. Just give me all the details, brother. And he would be the one who would send that stuff out and make sure that it got to Walsh. Like, that's some crazy stuff to be going on. Like, obviously in a prison population, you're going to find things that are weird and unusual. You're going to find but that's evil stuff. That's not people killing people. That's not gang violence. Those are sicko minds coming together in the shadow of the Ocala and finding connections to people who are just like them there.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that, is that when you start doing stuff like that, you have taken it to the next level.
Right.
Like because you're trying to get some sort of gratification off writing that and sending it to him, and then thinking about how's he going to respond.
Right.
Right. And then that's how you're going to get your pleasure as the person who's dropped to that low spot.
Point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a mind that you don't want to get into. And I've spent the last couple of years since I discovered Gerard Schaefer trying to get into what exactly was going on with him. And there's such a I've started a project called Boogeyman, and it's the myth and the man of Gerard Schaefer, because there are all these stories about him that may or may not be true. But even just his real, even that story I just told you, that's documented fact. He did that. That's taken on mythology level kind of weirdness in the Florida criminal justice system. Bundy walking up to Schaefer and saying to him, "Hey, thanks for that idea of killing two people at the same time. I never thought of that before. Nice job for the inspiration." That's some. What is the kind of, the mindset of that? And once you get your hands on something that you think he may have done and may not have done, all of a sudden you're now told that that's wrong. And then along with it, especially Schaefer, of the people we're talking about, there are so many haunted locations in Florida that may be haunted because of his actions there. And so you have this whole paranormal and supernatural side, and then just these really weird crimes and these disappearances that trace their way back to him. It's just insane. And like you were saying, it's new level type of stuff.
Yeah. I just noticed here as I was looking at the page I had pulled up on him, he was killed in prison on my birthday.
Oh, happy birthday.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm looking at it. It's like on December 3rd, an inmate at Florida State Prison entered Schaefer's cell and attacked him with a knife, slit his throat, then stabbed Schaefer 40 times, focusing on his eyes.
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like when they went after Red at West Virginia, I can imagine the blood spray from that.
One of the things that is a mystery is why it happened. Why exactly this? And so there are the going theories are, he was a jailhouse lawyer essentially. And so he had his hands in a lot of different pies and knew a lot of different information about a lot of different inmates. Oftentimes
he looks cunning.
Yeah,
he does not look illiterate.
He's got that baby face, like
I
want to eat your soul out kind of thing going on.
Yeah, but he looks like some guy you could just walk up to and start talking about stuff. I mean, he doesn't look like some psychotic.
Right. And on the out, he was a Marion, not a Marion County. He was I can't believe I'm losing it, but he was a sheriff's deputy, in a Martin County. He was a teacher for a while. He was in the army. Like, he was all these different things that were respectable areas, and he could talk people into his car. He could talk people into. He would have conversations with the parents of the people that he would then abduct. Very, and then what's creepier than that? Actually convincing them to let him go out, and that's how he was caught. It was like, wait a minute, I remember that guy. He was driving this kind of car. But they messed up the license plate number. So he's one of those people that people trusted. Mm-hmm. And some people say that he knew stuff that he wasn't supposed to know. And he had maybe said that he did things that he didn't do that were someone else's crimes. And that then you have like, all right, well, maybe that's why he was killed. You have other people, and this is one of the theories I hold on to more than others. You have the Gainesville Ripper case, and that's Danny Rowling, and he once again is in that same jail, right? And that becomes the inspiration for the movie Scream. So essentially, the movie Scream was inspired by something that happened right outside the Ocala. When Schaefer was younger, he was dating this woman named Sandra London, and when he went to jail, she reconnected with him because she was a writer, and she essentially helped him to publish what he was convicted with. So he was convicted with a journal and these creative writing stories that depicted all of his crimes in graphic detail. That then he said, well, no, none of that is real. Those are all just writing exercises. But it was very specific, including nicknames for the girls that were like where they were from in the country and stuff like that. So she took that and she helped him to make a book out of that. They break up. They kind of have a romantic thing going on. They break up, and eventually she becomes engaged to this Gainesville Ripper.
She's got a type.
Definitely has a type, right?
Yeah, she's got a type. Right.
There are some theories that dynamic led to the death, but then there's this story. And it's only a couple of lines in a somewhat obscure book about Schaefer. But it talks about he was a big talker, and sometimes he would get like, don't mess with me. I'm connected to this. I'm connected to that. And one of the things he said was that he was connected to a satanic cult out of Daytona, which ran the Ocala. And he started ranting and raving about this. He actually said it to Sandra London and as a threat. So don't mess with me because I can have those people kill you instantly. And he specifically mentioned they were biker gangs, that they were a biker gang that was actually an arm of a satanic cult. He's moved from Stark Prison to another prison within the Ocala. He came back and he recanted all of it. This dude didn't recant anything and didn't seem to be scared of anything. And then he's killed a little bit of time later. So my theory is that he knew a little too much and had heard from not only these people who he maybe been connected to, but a lot of the other inmates, exactly a lot of the details of what was going on inside the Ocala and who is responsible for this drug trafficking and definitely the human trafficking.
But you almost have to admire his ability to, I guess, get away with things, because the thing that I read was he was only convicted of 2 murders,
right?
But he's suspected well, I said I only read up to another 26,
up to 130,
up to 130. And in fact, you told us before the show that this stuff is still coming around. Like they just linked him to another one.
They just linked him to they knew. So what happened was when he essentially his story goes that he picks up these 2 hitchhikers and he ties them up to a tree. He hangs them from a tree. He's on duty, and he gets a call to hey, you need to go be a cop. So he leaves the girls there with the expectation that, like other women he's done it to, he's going to come back to finish the job afterwards. He gets back to the tree, and they've both escaped. So he immediately tells his boss, hey, listen, I think I messed up. I was trying to teach these hitchhikers. I was trying to be a good guy, and I was trying to teach these hitchhikers that they shouldn't be doing this. And so to scare them, I tied them to a tree and threatened to rape and kill them, and blah, 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 blah. And now I think they took it personally. They're gonna So while he's kind of on parole for that, they discover another crime from a few years earlier where the details are almost exactly the same. They suspect it's him, and they execute search warrants on his house and then his mother's trailer park in Fort Lauderdale, right? They find, in addition to all those stories that I was telling you about, they find souvenir after souvenir after souvenir. Sometimes it's clothing, sometimes it's driver's license, sometimes jewelry. It's a pocketbook, jewelry.
Yep.
And so they're still linking crimes to all that, right? And so this was a little girl. It was younger than his normal MO. It was a young girl who they identified Schaefer had to have killed, right? So they've identified that Schaefer had killed this. And then recently, this DNA testing was able to find that this girl who was killed in the late 60s, early 70s, was the person who Schaefer had killed, right? So they were finally able to identify this girl as who she is, and she's a Schaefer victim. So there are tons of cases where, for example, Nancy Leiter and Pamela Nader, who disappeared from Alexander Springs, 1966, everyone knows he did it. They found evidence in that trailer that he had murdered them, but they were so sure that he was going to die in jail, they never convicted him of any of these other crimes. The murders that happened at what's known as the Devil's Tree, which is not in the Ocala, but which is one of the most haunted locations in Florida. They know that he did that. They found their items, their souvenirs of him having murdered those women at the Devil's Tree, and they just never convicted him of it. So, he's got his hands in a lot of different things, and you don't know exactly what he did do or what he didn't do. There's never been published, as far as I know, an extensive 100% accurate list of everything they took out of those 2 locations. It's one of those things where they have certain items and they're not necessarily identified, but then some of these lists conflict with other ones. And so they believe they held back some of the stuff that was found there so that they could later kind of, catch him in a lie or something like that. And what happened is that when he was finally caught, anyone that he had touched, not necessarily physically, I mean, he had been in their lives and they had disappeared, he was automatically a suspect for. And so that number just kept escalating and escalating and escalating. And then, of course, he was probably getting details of a lot of crimes from these other inmates, and he was maybe taking credit for a little of them too. So you have this staggering number of like over 120 up to 130, when really he was just in jail for 2.
But had the prosecutors done their job, I think that number would have been substantially higher.
Yeah, I mean, you have at least,
it would have been at least probably a dozen, 12 to 15.
Yeah, I mean,
legitimately.
You have the two ladies, from Altoona.
Right. You got the neighbor, like this first kill was the neighbor who used to dress.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, so one of the things that I've been exploring for the last 2 years is I think that he is the prime suspect in one of the most notorious unsolved murders in Florida history. It's going on 50 years. Last year it had its 50-year anniversary. And that's the case of Little Miss Panisofsky, who is this body that was found in Lake Panisofsky, right in the shadow of the Ocala. And she's never been identified, and her killer has never been brought to justice. Have fun trying to spell. I can see you going to your keyboard. Have fun trying to spell Panisofsky without me. And
I'm pulling my map up.
What's interesting is over the last 50 years, there's been this obsession with trying to identify who she is, and not a lot of focus on who killed her. Right? Like, I think their theory is like, if we find out who she is, we might be able to solve who killed her. I'm like, how's that working for you? It's been 50 years. She was found in the lake with a belt wrapped around her neck. She had been asphyxiated that way. I have Schaefer in that area only 2 years earlier, having killed those 2 girls that I mentioned before. As far as I know, he's never been looked at as a serious suspect for this, but it has all the trademarks of a Schaefer killing. And so the project that I'm working on with that is kind of the foundation of it, or the structure of it, the skeleton of it is Schaefer did this murder. It's totally 100% Schaefer, and I use that to explore these other aspects of it. But Little Miss Panisofsky, it's been on Unsolved Mysteries 2 times. It's a famous case, and yet there's been no mention of who is an actual suspect in the killing. So it was Schaefer. You know how like I've got this cup that said Robert did it, Robert the doll? I just want one that says Schaefer did it too. So,
well, Zazzle.com will make that for you.
Christmas is coming up, guys. If you want me back on the show, you got to give it a little love.
Yeah, there it is.
We'll all drink out of our Schaefer.
There you go. We'll all do that. Yeah, I mean, it is this, it's crazy. Just like another really quick story, right? So I was tracking, there was supposedly these 2 sisters that he abducted, and they were never seen again. And I was able to find out that never happened. They just blamed him for it because he was a prime suspect. He was in that area. These girls disappeared. And so I was able to actually track this girl who was never actually disappearing at all. It just was like a rumor. And then this thing, she had run away for the day or something weird like that. And she ended up marrying the vampire king of Florida, right? On Halloween, in this beautiful, Gothic, Dracula themed thing. It was like, you can't even have the people who escaped Schaefer's grasp still had crazy lives after that, and to this day, she's still listed as one of her victims. And meanwhile, she's the vampire queen in a different part of Florida altogether. Spoilers, they get a divorce. She doesn't stay the vampire queen.
Oh, there it is.
But that's and now where does she live? She lives right near the Ocala. So, this is one of those things where it just draws in all of this kind of stuff.
So
I was going to say, let's go there unless Mike's got something else.
I kind of had a generalized question to kind of tie everything up. So you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I don't know even that we have enough time left, honestly, to get into the whole vampire cult thing. But that group, I mean, that guy who was doing it, like that leader. What the hell was his name?
Rod Farrell.
Yeah. Like
that's a different kind of vibe altogether, right?
Man,
like,
I'm telling you what, he's there's something off about him, just his photos. Just like reading it and looking at it, pictures of him, like there is something seriously off with this guy.
You want to automatically say that, okay, so we can all agree he's not a vampire. He's not a 500-year-old vampire.
No, he's not a demon either, which he named
or
himself
a demon and stuff like that. Yeah.
Right, out of Satan's army out of the Lesser Key of Solomon book.
Right.
Yeah.
He's not that.
No.
But we can agree that he was, to some degree, trained to be what he was.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, according to him and his mom, he was molested by older figures in the family who were part of a cult, who used him in ritual sexual acts.
Right.
His mom highly encouraged his vampirism, and as a matter of fact, was one of his followers, who you could say that she was just doing what was in her blood to do, no pun intended, but she was also having sex with most of his friends in the same time, right?
Yeah, she's 34, it says here, and she was writing sexually charged love letters to a 14-year-old boy.
Right. So you have this perfect environment, and he's bouncing back and forth between Ocala and an area in Kentucky that is very much connected to the same kind of negativity as the Ocala National Forest, right? Anyone who's seen Hellier, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Back and forth between these two locations his entire life, recruiting, like, as he's going back and forth, until eventually he goes to Eustis, Florida, which is in the Ocala, and commits the murder of two parents to essentially free one of his members to then go on this journey to New Orleans, which, as we all know, vampires at that time were obsessed with what's her name, and so they were all on their way to I'm trying to think of who you wrote Interview with a Vampire. I don't know why it's been a long day.
Oh, yeah.
I know who you're talking about too.
Right.
I don't know.
She recently passed away. But, these are three different, locations that all have this kind of vibe going on, and this kind of and so it's Anne Rice. Thank you very much, Nikki. And so it's one of those situations where he was perfectly set up to be evil.
Mm-hmm.
And he committed those crimes, and and much like the Night Stalker, there was something in all those kids who thought, under his guidance, they were untouchable, they were invisible, and so I think they fully thought that they were in this bubble where they couldn't be touched. People want to blame the fact that he was into the video game, and they want to, they want to say it was because, let's blame it on Marilyn and heroin if we're talking about our good friend Eminem. What are you talking about, man? Everything in this kid's life trained him to be a murderer, and it was such a logical path, and that path led straight to the Ocala.
Some people
Has it been 2 hours?
No,
close. 7 minutes short.
Yeah, and it's there honestly is so much, which is why it was hard writing the book. There's so much to talk about because, we didn't even really mention any ghost stories, right? And it's, there are at least 2 other books that are in there. There's the crime aspect of it. There's all the stories that I didn't even get to cover in the book, the ones I've uncovered since. There is just really a lot of things going on there. And so, I encourage people to do their own research and hop on the internet because, it is a rabbit hole that leads to all these other rabbit holes. And you'll find out what my life was like for 2 years doing the research. Forget the writing, just the research to get this book done.
So that actually leads into my question perfectly. So you have done multiple books. You have studied the Ocala extensively. You've found story after story after story, whether it's supernatural, whether it's cryptid, whether it's true crime. Has there been something that you have uncovered that has just truly surprised you or just kind of shocked you in, whether it's intensity, whether it's like just sheer, absurdity, or like it's gruesomeness? I mean, has there been anything that you have done that you have not written about just because you don't know how to do it?
It's the Swamp Witch. I will get that story right. The way that I'm currently writing it, and so I want to independently publish it because I don't want to have any constraints on it whatsoever. I want to tell the story the way I want to tell it. It's me telling the audience one ghost story. It's me trying to get this story of the Swamp Witch, which may or may not, it's not the inspiration for the Blair Witch Project. Spoilers, it's not. Trying to get from that story, but like a good ghost story, there is no direct from point A to point B. So as I'm telling that story, I have to bring in all of these other ghost stories and all these other unexplained things that happen so that you understand the context, so you can fully get the main story. That's how I want to write the book. That's the subject of the book. It's just been, unlike the Ocala, which was pulling my hair out, this one is the same kind of idea. And like, I got to get how I tell the story right. You were saying earlier, style, and title versus content.
Right.
This is one of those stories that I feel cannot see the light of day until I've learned how to tell it right. As opposed to gotten enough information or done enough research. It's a story that I think is important. I just haven't figured out what the reason why it's important quite yet. And that's the thing that has surprised me, because when I start to tell that story, and even when I'm working on a chapter, I realize like, oh crap, I've got to go do like another thing so that people understand this. And I stop what I'm writing and I start writing on that chapter because that's the path I want to take. That's been the surprising thing, how easy it is to start when you start looking at the Ocala in that area, to start finding connections between all of those things.
So now I have another question. So, because that brings up.
Yeah, it's not like I got to wake up to teach school tomorrow at 5 in the morning.
We have you for 3 more minutes, buddy.
Not by my clock. I'm out of here. Go ahead.
Because this is a question that I've asked multiple people. It has nothing to do with Florida itself. Mm-hmm. And I still have not really gotten much of an answer. And this theory, to my mind, came to me.
That puts a lot of pressure on me, but go ahead.
Yes, it does.
It does.
But like Ghost of Shepherdstown and Ghost of Morgan City were 2 great shows. But one of the things that kind of brought this theory into light was the fact that one certain event or one certain story, one certain entity was the catalyst for all of these other hauntings or events or whatever it is that these people were done. Do you think, whether it's the Swamp Witch or not, do you think that there's one specific story, one event, one tragedy, one whatever, that has been the catalyst for everything that is going on in the Ocala?
No. I like we were saying earlier.
I was asking Chris, Dave.
Well, that's okay, because Mike.
And I don't know the answer, so I'm like, Dave, what's the answer? And he's going,
no.
No, I don't think it is. I think what it is instead, and why it might look. I don't know the specific shows you're referencing, but what I know is this, and you guys both investigate, right? So you understand this, and people who do this and submerge themselves in this, and of course, Nikki, you can always talk about that line of Nietzsche: "You stare into the darkness, it stares back." There is something, and there is a unified theory out there somewhere having to do with the paranormal, something that explains everything and is the bloodline of the paranormal, but not necessarily the source or the reason, but something that feeds the paranormal. I think it might be mushrooms. And I'm not joking with that. I think it might be. When you start to look at this stuff, you start to see patterns. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's you fooling yourself. And I don't think it's you paranoid. You see signs, right? Mm-hmm. You're working on one thing, and then you see a cardinal, which leads you to something else. right? Or you start working with something and all of a sudden, you're seeing references to lizards everywhere and it means something to you. And you're like, I think that these things are all playing in the same playground and we're looking into that playground. But I don't think that, and maybe there's somewhat of a cause and effect between some of them, but I don't think that there's one paranormal big bang that's just like bibbity bobbity boom boom, like everything comes from this. I really don't feel that. I think it's more of we become submerged in this and we see the patterns that other people don't.
Awesome. I would agree with that, and I think that, as you said, looking into the darkness, I think for people out there, and I've said this, if you saw me face to face, it'd be one of the first things I would tell you is be careful how deep you start looking.
Yeah.
Because everybody I know that has been involved in the paranormal long enough is divorced, depressed, unhappy, feel like.
Wait, are you saying I'm depressed?
Well, people like sections of our life feel like they're missing. It's everybody that I know. Every single guy I know is.
Speak for yourself, there, buddy.
Well, you were never married.
Oh, that's true.
So
that was your thing. Yeah, I mean, and like I said, if you look at the 4 or 5 main people who are looking into the Bridgewater Triangle, our lives, regardless of how different our backgrounds are, there is so much common misfortune in our lives that it's like, is it that? And yeah, maybe that extends to just people that look into the paranormal, completely. But I like to think that that's not the case. I like to think that we're doing something that's interesting and that's something but it's maybe when we fall into those darker elements of it is when those darker elements start kind of, creeping into our lives.
I think it's the cost of admission.
Yeah. And
I summed it up to that a long time ago. I think that I had to pay the price of admission. And the bitch of it is you don't know that that's the price of admission until it's the price of admission. You're already at that point, and then you're like, shit, now how did I get here?
A psychic friend of mine, she's just an amazing psychic, and she's a real white lighter, despite the fact that she's got a twinge of evil to her. She long ago said to me, she's like, you're in the thick of this now. Like, you're into it because they've now identified you as someone who's not only looking into this, but who is a protector and a helper of those who need it. And they don't like people like that.
Right.
And so you're going to constantly be stumbling on this stuff, and it's going to seem like it's just random. Your dishwasher broke, but you're a target. And I think that extends to a lot of people who work in the paranormal, who are doing it right and who are onto stuff.
Right.
Well, I'm going to end it with this then. If my dishwasher breaking is the fault of the paranormal, they owe me a new hardwood floor.
No, I'm with you. And I'll send you the forms so that you can submit those and get something. It'll take probably 2 or 3 weeks to process.
Right. You have to take it to Ocala, and you have to put
you
have to put it on the ground in Ocala with a rock on it. And then leave it for 3 days. Come back. It'll be
back and it's not there.
It won't be there. Neither will the rock. And then 3 days after that, you go back, and then your answer will be there, right exactly where it was with the rock on it. So
yes, it'll say
it'll be a check. It'll be a check for a new Samsung dishwasher and hardwood floor repair.
Yeah, it'll be F off written in chicken blood.
Right. Exactly.
So, Chris, for the people who maybe they have questions about or stories for the Ocala, or they want to buy your book, how can they reach out to you? Where can they buy your stuff? Well, that's not helpful.
I've got him right here. Just hop on over.
I'll throw it with you. The best place to go. You can go to if you're looking for the books, you can go to Amazon. All of my books are on Amazon. Probably the best thing for you to do would be to go to facebook.com/trippingonlegends, and you can direct message me, and you can get a signed copy for a lower price. You can go to my website, and that's probably the best place to follow me. The show, you can go to any platform that you get your podcasts, other than Spotify, and it has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with the fact I have video often. You can go to my Instagram, which is Spooky Tripping. Any of those places, trippingonlegends.com is the main website. Any of those places, you can totally get anything that you're looking for or want to share with me.
Perfect.
Nice.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and especially for the entire 2 hours when you have to get up early tomorrow and go to work.
And got up early today and went to work. Like, I'm really putting myself out there because I love you guys.
Well, we love you too.
No, I'm kidding. I absolutely 100% love being on the show. It's always a really good. You guys ask some of the best questions that I have to like, oh, wait a minute, let me stop and think rather than just be like blah, blah, blah. So I always appreciate that about you guys.
Yeah, we always like to make sure our guests don't know how to answer.
Right. Utter confusion from your guesses is the goal. Yeah. Not to mention the fact the title of your show is one word that I cannot spell at all.
Yeah,
Well,
files is a tough word, man.
Yeah, it really is really tough, which is hilarious because in addition to being an English teacher who has taught the Odyssey for like the last 7 years
at home.
and was a coach of my daughter's Odyssey of the Mind team, I still can't spell the word. We spell good.
Yeah, that's all right. I actually had a check written out that actually spelled out Odyssey.
I can spell Odysseus better than I can spell the word Odyssey. That's how weird my mind works.
But I now know exactly how to spell it. So
and I will too, because I'm constantly going to be promoting your stuff.
Well, I appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
Well, that does it for us this week. Appreciate everybody for watching and listening later. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Chris, again, thank you very much. Can't wait to have you back on.
Thank you guys very much.
And yeah, so everybody stay healthy, stay safe. We want to see you back here.